Уважаемые друзья,
Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I am happy to welcome all the participants and guests to the Russian Energy Week. This time, the forum has brought together the record number of professionals, all those interested in the energy sector, 9,500 people. So they came here so that in an open, reliable and trusting discussion to discuss the global energy agenda. It is well known that Russia is one of the major stakeholders of the Russian energy market. We take the leading positions in producing and exporting oil and gas. We are among the leaders of electric energy production and production of coal. It is very important for us to be highly responsive to the trends of global energy so that efficiently utilize our competitive advantages and together with other countries to form the joint energy space and joint energy future. We believe that ensuring the progress of world energy sector, the reliable energy security of our whole planet, is only possible through global partnership, working according to joint, same rules, the same for all, and of course, transparent, constructive dialogue of all the participants of the market without any political undercurrents, on the basis of pragmatism, understanding of solidarity, and reliability of mutual interests. The balance of supply and demand at the oil market achieved thanks to the agreement with OPEC has proven that our approach was right. Russia is going to further foster the dialogue between oil-producing countries to ensure stability of the oil markets, to create sustainable conditions for the development of the sector and ensuring long-term investments. I'd like to point out, in the near future, demand for oil is going to grow mostly thanks to the consumers in the Asian Pacific region, although the same trends are to be observed in Europe and in North America. Reliable, partner-like approach of Russia is crystal clear. Russia fulfills it both at the gas market, where it demonstrates an example of reliability and predictability, and on other markets too. Our advantage is not only the major stocks of natural gas, but also the presence of well-developed delivery infrastructure, as well as a pipeline infrastructure that ensures low-cost and sustainable stores of net gas at the market. Apart from that, the levels of LNG trade is also growing. In the recent 10 years, it has almost doubled. Russia is an active participant of the LNG market. We put into operation new producing and processing capacities. We carry out strategic plans of development of transportation infrastructure, among other things, improve the Northern Sea route and create icebreaker fleet that will allow for all year-round navigation, including the gas carriers within the spaces of Russian Arctic. Another important track of global energy that also is showing positive trends is coal industry. 10 years ago, very few believed that it is a promising energy resource. However, today we see the demand for coal growing, especially in the countries of APR. For Russia, it is important to get a foothold and increase its capacities at this dynamic market. We improve our capacity, including those of the infrastructure, the Baikal system, the Trans-Siberian Railroad. We improve the capacity of the seaports. We ensure efficiency and security of production. We give extra attention to eco-friendliness of technologies, transportation of coal and its consumption, especially in electricity production. We are going to improve the heat generation in Russia to introduce digitalization to the energy network. In the nearest 20 years, the world is likely to see the robust demand for energy. The experts believe that by the year 2040, the consumption of electricity power is going to double, while the demand for primary sources of energy, that is oil, coal, and gas, and other important sources will be higher by 30%. The same trends are to be observed in exports and in the technology of the energy production. Another important point is maintaining leading positions in such a high-tech sector as nuclear energy. Today, Russia is actively constructing 25 nuclear power plants in 12 countries of the world. All in all, we are planning to build 36 of those. We are going to increase the number of requests in electricity and energy, while maintaining the highest possible standards in security and industry. Another important goal is the development of renewable energy sources, especially in the hard-to-access and remote regions of our country, such as East Siberia and the Russian forest. For our vast country, the largest in the world, with its diverse natural and climatic conditions, we have enormous opportunities and potential for development. Summing up, I'd like to say the following thing. Sustainable, progressive development of energy is the key condition for dynamic growth of global economy, improvement of the quality of life of our people, improvement of welfare of all the people on our planet. Russia is open for cooperation in the field of energy. That is for the benefit of the global energy security, for the benefit of the future generations. And of course, we hope for the active dialogue on all these topics and for cooperation. Thank you very much for attention.
President Putin, thank you very much. While you were making your way here, I informed everyone in the room that you were meeting with the OPEC Secretary General. I'm not sure if that was a secret or not, but it's no longer a secret. I want to start with the price of oil and the oil market. The question everyone wanted to know from you and from the OPEC Secretary General in Saudi Arabia last year was, at this gathering, was how long you were prepared to maintain the cuts in production. Well, a lot has changed over the last year. The question now is how much more oil is Russia prepared to add to the market? If you think about this time last year, and now the price of oil, a barrel of oil, is more than 50% what it was last year, from about $55 a barrel to $85 a barrel today. A lot of people would argue that shows the success of Russia's partnership with OPEC. That said, there is one other head of state, President Trump, who says that the price of oil is too high. Is Russia going to pump more oil to lower prices?
Вы спросили в первой части.
So, in the first part, you meant whether Russia is ready to maintain the volumes of production.
Простите, was how long is Russia prepared to maintain cuts? Now the question is, how much oil is Russia going to give to the market?
Да. Вот что касается сокращения добычи.
As for the reduction of production and keeping it quite low, well, you see that this is just a tool. This is not our goal. Our goal is to balance the market. When we, together with our colleagues and friends from OPEC, agreed that we cut the production, this is what we were talking about. We talked about cutting excessive stocks. We're talking about balancing the market, because this is not about incomes of oil companies. This is about the situation in this industry. It is about creating tools for investment projects. This is what we talked about. Apart from that, if market is not balanced, there is a situation which leads to reduced investment, and as a result, finally, this will create a deficit at the market, and the prices will jump up. Our position is very responsible. We were talking about balancing the market, and we managed to reach this goal together with our colleagues from OPEC. We have really met with OPEC Secretary General right now, and we talked about our cooperation. And probably for the first time in history, all the participants of such agreements came up with their obligations 100%. They totally complied with their obligations. For example, take Russia. Our obligation were to cut the production by 300,000 of barrels, and we did so. So the market is balanced right now. Oil price is growing, but this is not the result of our activity, but the result of circumstances that we created, the result of expectations and decisions about Iran, which were absolutely illicit and malicious for global economy. I'm also talking about developments in Northern Africa related to some circumstances there, like civil war and so on and so forth. I'm talking about situation in Venezuela, about the restrictions that were introduced there. President Trump, as you said, thinks that this price is too high. Well, probably to some end he's right, but we're absolutely okay with it. $65, $70, $75 per barrel is okay in order to ensure efficient operation of energy companies and ensure investment process. But let's be frank, such oil price is actually to some part result of activities of current US administration. I'm talking about sanctions against Iran, about political problems in Venezuela. Just have a look at what's going on in Libya. The state has collapsed, actually. This is the result of irresponsible policy, which has a direct impact on global economy. So not only in energy, but also in policy, in political area, we have to establish a closer cooperation in order to avoid such disturbances. And talking about the increase, well, really, we have increased by 400,000 barrels as we agreed with our partners. We can do 2,100 more.
Last Thursday, as you'll be aware, speaking at the United Nations, President Trump accused OPEC, of which Saudi Arabia is the de facto leader, of ripping off the rest of the world. He also, this weekend, called King Salman of Saudi Arabia and asked him to increase production. So how much oil is Saudi Arabia pumping right now, and how much oil is Saudi Arabia prepared to provide?
Well, thank you, Ryan, and let me express my pleasure to be here. This is my second year in a row to participate in this great forum. It's a distinct honor to be on the panel with Honorable President Putin and other colleagues. And of course, I have almost a weekly communication channel directly with His Excellency Alexander Novak, where we work together on our bilateral relationship, but also importantly, on stabilizing the global market. I want to acknowledge the catalytic role that President Putin and the leadership of Saudi Arabia played in bringing the kind of stability that the President just talked about, in particular, the meeting a couple of years ago on the sidelines of the G20 in Guangzhou, where the two leaders, President Putin and His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman, agreed that we will bring producers of a like-minded, responsible position to bring stability back to the market. And I think our success speaks volumes for the alignment and the leadership of Russia and Saudi Arabia in global energy markets. As the President said, from the first conversation we had, our objective was to bring supply and demand in balance, inventories within a comfortable range, and investment flows back into the industry, and a revival of an industry that was suffering from bankruptcies, layoffs, and lack of direction. I think on all of those fronts, we have achieved 100% success. It remains the question of the price, and my position and the Kingdom's position on the price is that it's left to the markets. What we can influence is fundamentals, and the fundamentals today are extremely healthy. Inventories are actually building counter-seasonally in the third quarter. Usually the second half, as many of my colleagues in the energy industry knows, that typically that's the high demand season, high refining, and we see a lot of draws on global inventories. We're seeing OECD and US inventories building since June, when we made the courageous decision in Vienna together, led by Russia and Saudi Arabia for the OPEC Plus grouping, that it's time to ease supplies. I can tell you that at that time, or preceding our meetings in Vienna, Saudi production was below 10 million for the entire first 5 months of the year. In October, we're producing about 10.7 million, and I anticipate that November will be slightly higher. This is not a unilateral decision. We've made a commitment together with Russia and other partners that we will bring compliance back to 100%, and we're on our way to do this. And this has translated just between Russia and Saudi Arabia as of today to about 1 million barrels between the two countries, 700 plus 300. I know the UAE, Iraq, and we have the energy minister from Iraq here in the room, has also pumped more. So the OPEC Plus is very responsive to meeting demand. And I said just before the panel today that not a single customer of Saudi Aramco has requested a barrel since June that has not been responded to. But I think we have to assume that the forces that the Honorable President mentioned, geopolitical tension, speculation, will ultimately ebb, and we will see stability back in the market. I think what's important is to think what is going to happen in the next decade and beyond as supply continues to decline in maturing fields, as demand continues to grow at a healthy pace. Is the energy industry prepared to invest? And thanks to the alignment that Russia, Saudi Arabia, OPEC, and other producers have, we can provide that assurance that the market will have stewardship and that there is predictability and stability.
Thank you very much, Patrick. For the last several months now, you've been talking about how the oil price is going to go to $100 a barrel. It's been growing quite quickly. Do you think it could go beyond $100 a barrel? Where are we headed?
I will not make an announcement today, in front of Vladimir President Putin and His Excellency Khaled Al-Faleh. I think, no, the fundamentals of the market is just that you have a strong demand in the market, but you have, it is true, some supply-side disruptions, which is not coming at all from the OPEC countries, which are playing their role to balance the market. And His Excellency is right to say that the inventories are building up, but you have other elements in the markets which are more of the geopolitical side, which were mentioned by President Putin, which are also taken into account. And the market anticipates today more disruption on the supply side than required. And so this is why, we have broken this type of ceilings. I don't of $80. We are going up quickly, and everything is possible. What we have observed in the last 2-3 years is a huge volatility in the oil market, a huge volatility. And we were at 42 1 year ago, 85 today, 100% in 12 months. So that's the situation. Again, it's not, as I said, as well, very good for the industry because, at this level of price, some countries, emerging countries, have difficulty, and the demand could be affected, which is, we don't need that to invest. We don't need that. And a company like Total, we worked hard to be able to live at $50 per barrel. So 60, 65 is enough to invest, in fact. And it's true that we have been prudent in the last years, but now we are investing more and more.
President Putin, is it right for the President of the United States to be so actively trying to manage the price of oil? We're coming up on elections in the United States. He's concerned about the price of gas. A gallon of gas in the United States costs almost $3. Traditionally, voters punish the party in power when prices rise ahead of elections. Is he doing the right thing, or actually should he step out of the oil market and let the market dictate what happens?
Я уже говорил, я еще раз хочу повторить.
Well, I have already talked about it, and I'd like to repeat. We had a positive meeting with U.S. President in Helsinki. If we touched upon the topic that we're discussing now with him, I would say, if you want to find the culprit of who's guilty that prices are growing, then you should just have a look in the mirror. You have just been talking about geopolitical factors of oil price increase. They are real. They play a real role at the market, and probably we'd better not intervene in those market process. And probably we shouldn't try to get some competitive advantages using political tools, and probably we should not try to regulate prices as the USSR did, because this is not for good. When we talk about our coordinated actions with OPEC, we actually do not employ unnecessary tools and instruments. What we do is we just put supply and demand in balance at the market, and that's it. And all the rest, as of today, are just pure geopolitical factors. As for gas prices, they are built out of oil prices, because prices for oil are built at the market and gas prices are oil dependent. There is a certain time lag of 5 to 6 months, and gas price will be fluctuating, and it will be dependent on oil price. And what's going on in the United States? The United States is one of the chief producers of oil and gas in the world, and everything that relates to latest technologies that environmental experts are actually against. Sometimes this production is actually barbaric, and we try to escape such approaches. But I do not know if somebody is trying to influence the administration there. Well, let us just talk about energy. Please do not drag me into political processes and rumors of the United States. Otherwise, they will say that we interfere.
Маленькая поправка перевода. When I spoke about the price of gasoline in the United States, a gallon of gasoline, I meant the price of petrol, of benzene, not gas.
А ведь это...
Well, you see that the price of final product, when we talk about petroleum products, is not only dependent on primary oil and gas price. There is also state policy that influences the ultimate price for consumers. And what is the taxation part out of it? For example, some European countries actually increase the price for gas that they buy with us. They increase it nearly twofold. So this is all dependent on policy of the consumer state. So don't point at the producer of energy resources. Just have a look at those who consume it, at their policy, at what they do in order to create a positive price for them.
Let's talk about Iran. Patrick, Total would have been the largest foreign investor, energy investor in Iran, had you not pulled out of the nearly $5 billion deal there to develop the world's largest gas field in Iran. Right now, the European Union is looking at a plan that would allow for trade between Iran and other countries, despite the U.S. sanctions, that would allow countries to get around the sanctions. Is that what the EU is talking about with this new initiative? would that be enough to allow you to return to investing in Iran?
The answer is no. It's no, because we are in a world where one country is imposing its law, and we cannot, Total, which is a global company, we operate in 130 countries around the world. We cannot afford to take the risk to be banned from using the US financial system. That's the reality of our world, and EU is trying to make some efforts, mainly directed, I think, to SMEs rather than large corporations, but the answer is no.
President Putin, let me ask you about this EU initiative. What do you make of it?
This came too late, but better late than never. It came too late because not long ago, President of France, when making a speech in New York, talked about the necessity to increase the economic sovereignty of the European Union, to decrease its dependence on the United States. This is correct. This is absolutely right. Because using political tools, somebody tries to get competitive advantages here in business. I believe that nobody likes it, but this is what's going on. And we see it happening today. That is why, taking into account the circumstances, to think about some new opportunities, for example, to trade not in dollars. And here I'd like to repeat my idea. I believe that our US partners make a grand mistake by undermining the trust to US dollar as to the only reserve currency. They undermine the trust in it as in the reserve instrument. They literally are trying to break the branch of a tree they sit on. But this is a typical error that any empire makes. People, they think that everything is absolutely okay, that everything is so solid, that there cannot be any single negative consequence. But this is not the case. Negative consequences will be in place. And after that, we understand that our European partners want to comply with their obligations in what regards the Iran nuclear program. And they see an element of stability in global policy in it, which is reflected in the global economy as well.
Let me come back to Iran real quickly here. Ben, I wanted to ask you, have you been surprised by the speed with which countries facing these sanctions, which will be imposed upon Iran in November, have curtailed their purchases of exports and how it's influenced the price of oil?
Well, let me say, first of all, we're not monitoring exactly what is happening to Iranian oil and how that will find its way into the market. We don't see that as necessarily critical or crucial to our business. It appears that indeed the United States is very firm in its intent to curtail exports from Iran, and that clearly is also being reflected in sentiment into the market. Earlier on, we talked a little bit about price formation. I believe that certainly in the near term, the dynamics in the oil market are very much driven by sentiment, and it could be sentiment around Iran and sentiment about all sorts of other things, imperfect information, which is quite typical for our market, and of course also lack of visibility and clarity about how supply will develop and how demand will develop. All of these factors conspire against a stability in the oil market if you're not very careful. I have to commend President Putin and His Excellency for the stability, indeed, that they have brought to markets, because nobody in the end is served by a volatile oil market. The visibility for companies like us or other countries to invest, the visibility on cash flows, comes to a point that indeed we are starting to affect the fundamentals of the market, the fundamentals of supply and demand. So bringing stability is fundamentally a good thing. Where the price will end, I am with the previous speakers on that. That's a function of where the market will land. I would argue that what we are seeing at the moment as an oil price is not an unreasonable oil price. We will need to attract a significant amount of investment that has been curtailed now for the last few years in order to see the market balance for years to come. And bear in mind, of course, we have to look at perhaps what the next few quarters bring, but ultimately the industry cannot bring supply on in a matter of months or quarters, with the exception perhaps of countries that have spare capacity. But industry participants like ourselves don't have spare capacity. We have to make investment decisions, we have to construct, we have to start up, and that comes with delays of 4, 5 years or longer. And therefore, predictability in the market is a good thing to have. And I think we should be grateful for the predictability that is being brought about over the last few quarters and years.
Thank you, President Putin. I'd like to go back to Iran for a second. One of the things that the United States would like to see Iran do is to obviously withdraw from Syria. The U.S. National Security Advisor just last week said that the United States is going to now stay in Syria as long as Iran and its proxies are there. Russia's been very clear. Russia says that the U.S. military's presence in Iran is illegal. What can you do about the U.S. being in Syria?
There are two possibilities in order to stabilize the situation, to improve it. First of all, the U.S. should get a mandate of the UN Security Council for the presence of their armed forces at the territory of a third country, in this case, at the territory of Syria. Or they should get an invitation of the legal government of the Syrian Arab Republic in order to bring their military personnel to the country. There is no other third way of ensuring the presence in the international law.
What can Russia do to change the U.S.'s position? The U.S. says it's going to stay, that Iran has to leave, and the U.S. will stay until Iran pulls out of Syria. So what can Russia do?
The U.S., in this case, as we understand, can just easily resort to reading the UN Charter. Then they will see that I am speaking the right things. There is nothing new about that. The U.S., in this case, are violating the UN Charter and the international law. Their military presence at the territory of another country, of the country they are present at, without the resolution, without any permissions, without invitations, it's illegal. There is nothing good about that. Proceeding from the fact that we still do cooperate in Syria with our U.S. partners in combating terrorism, in combating the terrorists of the Islamic State. But while the Islamic State organization is being eliminated at the territory of Syria, we are still not getting any international explanation, legitimization of why the U.S. is longer present there. We should strive for the situation when there would be absolutely no foreign forces at the territory of Syria.
Including Russian forces, of course.
Yes, including Russia. If the decision will be taken at the governmental level of the Syrian Arab Republic.
You just struck a deal with President Erdogan on Syria. Do you think that that's going to hold?
What does it have to do with oil, I wonder?
It's in a very sensitive geopolitical area.
Well, perhaps it has something to do with oil if we consider that Syria is also an oil producer. And still, there is some influence on the markets. In this case, that's true. We need a stable Syria, without a doubt. And not to mention other aspects, speaking about the international security and combating terrorism. That is a very good deal, I'd like to say, between Russia and Turkey in this case. because it let us avoid yet another bloodshed. You see, the essence of the deal is that we agreed to create a demilitarized zone 15-20 kilometers deep within the de-escalation area in the vicinity of Idlib, that is the Idlib area. And I'd like to point out that right now we truly proactively work on implementing these agreements. And our Turkish partners too. We see that, we are thankful for that to them, we appreciate that and are going to work with them further with the support of Iran in this case.
Let's return to energy, or at least more directly to energy, President Putin, and talk about Nord Stream 2. That's the pipeline that Gazprom wants to build between Russia and Germany. Again, the President of the United States has said his opinion about this. He says that Germany is effectively a hostage already of Russia because it depends on Russia for so much of its energy and gas supplies, and that it's vulnerable to, quote, extortion and intimidation from Russia. What do you make of that?
Комментарий очень простой.
My comment will be short and simple. Just briefly, in Helsinki, we have spoken about that with Donald. Speaking about any trade, about any sales, shipment and deliveries, we are a traditional producer. Starting with the 60s of the previous century, we are delivering gas to Europe. We do it highly reliably, in a professional manner, in the competitive spirit and on the competitive prices for the European market. And if we consider the peculiarities of the gas market as such, the price depends on the volumes of the supply between Russia and Europe. The distance is so long that it is most reasonable to deliver pipeline gas. In this case, the price will always be competitive. Experts do understand that always. Here, near me, there are a lot of people who are experts, who can freely sit near me and provide you with their expertise. They will provide assurance of my words. Thus, Nord Stream 2 is a purely commercial project. I'd like to underline that. It is linked to the increase of energy consumption, among other things, in Europe, first of all, and the reduction of energy producing in Europe. Thus, they need energy. What can be done in this case? We provide 34% of the required energy to Europe. That's a fair share, but that's not a monopoly. Europe can get, for example, gas from other sources, and they do. However, the liquefied natural gas coming from the US on the market is 30% more expensive than our gas. Just imagine the situation when you want to buy some resource of the same quality and then you have a price that is 30% higher. If Europe does that, then the common competitiveness of the German economy will critically decline. It is crystal clear for everyone. Still, business is business, work is work. We are ready to work with all the partners. You know, the German partners have started the construction stage at sea. We also get to that. We do not have any more problems with getting the permissions. Finland has taken its decision, Sweden too, Germany, Russia, all the decisions and permissions are here. That's enough for us, and the project will be fulfilled.
Let's return to American LNG and LNG in general in a second. But as you said, two of our five participants in this panel are in fact either directly or indirectly investors and partners in Nord Stream 2. Ben, the CEO of Shell to your left, is one of them. You know, the U.S. has threatened to sanction European companies that invest in this project. Are you at all concerned about running afoul of the U.S. administration?
Well, let me first of all say that President Putin's macroeconomic analysis is entirely correct. It's clear that Europe will need more imports. Indigenous production in Europe is in decline. We will need to import in Europe from a multiplicity of sources, as we have been doing for some time. Russian pipeline gas from North Africa, LNG from all over the world, hopefully at some point in time also LNG from the Baltic, from Russia. And, you know, Russia has been a very reliable supplier of gas for many decades under different political realities, and that needs to be recognized as well. So if I just for a moment put my European hat on, I think it makes eminent sense for European countries and economies to avail themselves of the infrastructure that will give them maximum optionality. Prices will ultimately be set by international markets. And I would also agree with President Putin that the cost of supply of Russian gas is probably one of the most competitive ones. And therefore, it will be most likely LNG at the margin that will set European prices more than Russian pipeline gas. So we are participants in the project. We have been participants in this project for a number of years, of course. We've done that with the authorization of all relevant authorities, with the consent of Washington, may I add. But of course, what we are seeing at the moment is a political dynamic that we are being caught up in. I'm not a politician. I'm not a diplomat. I'm a business person. We have to do the right thing by our shareholders, but we also have to take the realities of the legal system that we have to live in. If the United States, for reasons that they believe are important, will sanction us or the project, then we have no choice. And I'm actually quite philosophical about that. I have no other choice.
No choice but to exit the project.
Well, let's see how that plays out. It depends, of course, very much on what the United States decides it wants to do.
President Putin, did you want to jump in here?
Мы понимаем реалии.
We understand the reality of what's going on. We highly respect all of our partners. We have long-standing, very good, very cordial relations with all of our partners, including the company that is represented by my neighbor from the left. These are the companies that work at the Russian market, and they do work successfully. We understand, however, what's going on. Thus, we implement the project with our own resources and forces. We might have some problems here, but if they arise, we'll solve them, I assure you. There are issues that are more important than political manipulations. For example, speaking about the deliveries to the Federal Republic of Germany. Perhaps not all of you know that in Germany a decision was taken to close nuclear production plants. However, in the total balance of energy of the country, 34% was attributed to the nuclear energy. We for ourselves are proud by our nuclear energy sector, but we have 16%, and we are looking forward for achieving 25. However, Germany had 34 and is going to give it up. There will be an enormous vacuum that has to be fulfilled. Just have a look. Our competitors and partners suggest that they can use LNG. It's true, in the total basket there should be LNG for Europe too, but from all the LNG ports that already exist in Europe, do you know how many of them are used? Only 25% of the facilities are used. Why? Because it is not profitable. Because there is business and there are regions which profit from getting LNG. It is beneficial to deliver and sell LNG to them. That's why the LNG market grows. But Europe is not the place. And thus, we have already fulfilled all our intentions with Nord Stream 1, and it is functioning successfully, while the deliveries to Europe are constantly growing. 194 billion of cubic meters have been delivered to Europe last year. As far as I remember, this year we are going to have about 200. Blue Stream is functioning to almost to its full capacity. All the other pipelines too. However, the demand still grows. That's why it's important that we do that.
President Trump's position on American LNG exports is perhaps a little bit more nuanced. His point is that instead of buying Russian gas, even perhaps if it's a bit more expensive, the Germans and other European allies of the United States, because the United States is paying for their defense, should be buying American gas, even if there's, I guess the argument suggests, a little bit of a higher price for that.
Вы знаете, аргумент...
Oh, well, you know, this is not really a very good argument. However, I see Donald is protecting the interests of his country and his business, and perhaps if I were him, I would do almost the same. However, the US LNG is not a bit more expensive, but 30% more expensive. It's quite a bit. Too much, I'd rather say. It's, in fact, doesn't make the plan implementable. However, there are some markets where LNG is efficient. For example, the Asian Pacific region. By the way, the first shipment from our new facility at Yamal liquefied natural gas facility, the first tanker, where did it go? It went to the US, you know. Why? Because it brought profit to the businessmen. That is the consequences of market. Who did buy the first oil tanker? The US did, because it was profitable at that time, at that place, at that time, and they did buy it. And still the deliveries are sent to the American continent because it is profitable. One cannot fight with these trends of the market. One just should look for mutual approaches to create favorable conditions at the market, among other things, for oil recovery in the US, for oil consumption and gas consumption in the US, so that suppliers and customers will find themselves in favorable conditions. One can do that while harmonizing the policy lines, not by imposing some decisions on one partners. Speaking about the argument of providing protection in return for unfair trade, I believe it's not the right one. What is the result then? The Europeans today are starting to speak about more independence in providing security of their countries, that they should perhaps create their own security and protection union that will not be competitive in the face of NATO, but still will ensure that they will have a better security policy. That is the result of such maneuvers, as far as I know. And thus, I believe that much will be changed through life itself.
No, I just wanted to support a little bit the argument that President Putin made. We have contracts to import LNG from the US. They started delivering cargoes to us this year. So far, these contracts were designed and entered into to be shipped to Europe. But so far, we have sold these cargoes to Asia, Southeast Asia, not to Europe because of economic convenience. There is no economic convenience today to sell LNG into Europe when you can sell it elsewhere where prices are higher. So LNG is a great commodity. It's liquid, you can move it around, and it's very difficult to compete with piped gas so far in this part of the world. It's as simple as that.
Patrick.
I just would like an argument. I went to Washington and discussed with Rick Perry and Steve Mnuchin. You know, we are Total investing in US LNG, also in Russia LNG. And I told them, you know, as a US investor in an LNG plant, I don't want to send my LNG to Europe. My target is to send it to Asia. So your argument that US LNG should go to Europe is not at all the interest of business, of people who are investing in the US today. So all that I think is wrong. We should just let the market strength. You are in a liberal market, a free market in Europe, and then let's competition. And in fact, US energy somewhere is putting a ceiling on the gas price in Europe, which is good for European consumers. Let the competition go, and Ben was perfectly right. Maximize the number of infrastructure, and the most competitive sources of gas will be bought. That's very simple, and I think there is a big mistake to mix politics, geopolitics, and energy, because at the end, it's the consumers who would pay all that. And we should think to that in a continent where we will rely, our energy in Europe is relying upon importation, which is fundamental for economic growth of the continent.
Pekka, let me give you an opportunity. Fortum has a 47% stake in Uniper, which is one of the 5 financial investors in the Nord Stream pipeline. I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. I'm, of course, an electricity guy, so I comment from that point of view. And to continue on what President Putin said about Germany shutting down nuclear, which will significantly affect the energy balance, of course, we also need to remember that currently Germany is producing 40% of their electricity with lignite or coal. And in Germany, as in all Western European countries, because of the need to reduce emissions, the pressure on coal will also increase. Europe's own production of gas will go down, as has been mentioned here, and at the same time, 2020s will in many respects be the decade of electricity. It was mentioned here that the share of electricity in final consumption of energy today is, well, it is about 20% today. It will grow in the future. We will see electrification of traffic. We will see electrification of decentralized heating in many parts. We will see electrification of some significant industrial processes. And the fact is that in a country like Germany, if you shut down nuclear and if you want to reduce the use of coal, it is not going to be enough to just have a lot of wind and solar and maybe some hydro. When you are without nuclear, then it automatically means that the strategic importance of gas as providing security of supply and providing balancing power for big peak consumption hours will grow. So from that point of view, we have a very pragmatic approach to this whole question, and we see it as a purely commercial project that makes sense. And as a shareholder in Uniper, we obviously expect them to honor the commitments that they have made.
Minister Falek, I was not expecting so many people wanting to weigh in on this issue, but we're delighted.
Well, I just want to come from the angle of Saudi Arabia. And we talked about the policy coordination and oil market stability, but investing in Russia has been an area that we've looked at. And in addition to oil field services, where we've already made some investments with the RDIF, Kirill Dmitriev, and under the guidance of President Putin have made it obvious to us that there are great technologies, great companies, great business drivers here that brings foreign direct investment that adds value to investors. But in the area of LNG in particular, I've attended the inauguration of Yamal 1, and Saudi Aramco today is in advanced discussions of being a partner with Novatek and Total and other international partners to participate in the next phase of developing that great resource. And what we've discovered over the last 2 years is that unlike this image that has been painted, that this country is closed, that it's a monolithic state control, that it's actually quite capitalistic, quite market-driven, investment conditions are attractive, and we will have our right, if we proceed with this investment, to offtake the LNG, to take it to global markets, mostly Asia, but if we need it in the kingdom and in the region, as the president suggested to me in Yamal, to replace burning of liquids, we will be able to do that. So I would just say from our perspective that there are great resources, great conditions, and the market forces here in Russia are very conducive to globalization and to allowing this competitive, healthy process of bringing the cheapest resource in the global landscape to the markets that need it.
Please.
Let me perhaps add one more thing to what was just said. We've been investing in Russia since already almost a decade. Okay, we have been changing our investment horizon over the years. We have been investing in oil and in gas exploration and production for some time, then sold. We have been investing, and we are in one of the largest energy producers. We have started an investment program through Russia with our co-shareholders, RDIF, in renewables that is now coming into the system. What we try to see here is that the whole changing specter of technologies that are affecting the energy world, and that includes the big digital effort that I think Russia will start to pick up with Rossetti guiding this, is that in Russia, maybe this is not something that everybody is aware of. Russia is one of the luckiest countries in the world in terms of energy. There is not a single form of energy that lacks in big scale. So the choice is perhaps even too much. There is an incredible combination of energy sources that Russia can play with. And what we have observed is that across this time period, the logic of development of different energy resources has been quite straightforward and well organized. And it has been perhaps driven by the idea that energy in itself is not something that you can build your life around. Energy is good because it develops society, it develops an industry, it develops technological growth. Today, the fact that you start here in Russia to see renewable energy coming in is not because you lack energy. You could go on for ages without renewables in Russia. But putting renewables into the picture develops a full new industry that can pick up and become another competitive battleground for Russian industries. So industry is the core of welfare for nations. Energy is just an enabler for industry to develop. And I think that's the way in which Russia started to see this from the beginning, and that's why we remain in this country, because we see this logical connection between the development of the economy and energy, and not just energy on a standalone basis, because energy alone is nothing. Even if we are all energy people, we should be aware of that. Energy is nothing without society that uses it.
Thank you. We have so many topics that I want to cover, but we can't leave the subject of LNG without giving the floor very briefly to Ben, who just did the biggest deal in LNG in 5 years, $12 billion investment, LNG Canada. Why the optimism?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. We sanctioned the Canadian LNG project yesterday morning. Been a project in the making for quite some years, of course. But we believe it's the right project at this point in time, right location, aiming for the right markets, but also the timing is right. We are looking at a market that will be tightening up in the next few years. Already we see some tightening in the LNG markets. The 20s, we will probably see that demand will remain unfulfilled in very significant proportions. So having a project come in that is competitive, both from a financial perspective, a resource quality perspective, ecological perspective, this will be the lowest carbon footprint LNG by a large margin ever built, is the right thing to do. But I would be remiss sitting here in Moscow talking about a Canadian LNG project if I wouldn't also mention 2 Russian LNG projects that we are in. We are still in the leading LNG, or the first LNG project in Sakhalin, where we are looking very much to expand that project. That project is probably even more advantaged in terms of where it is, location-wise, in the middle of markets, with a fantastic track record. It's the best LNG project in the world in terms of its performance and track record. And we're working together with Gazprom on another extremely promising LNG project in the Baltic, which will service a very dynamic market in the Atlantic basin. Both projects that have, in my mind, tremendous potential and fit in the same way right into that period of tightness in the market that will be coming up in the 2020s. So we are optimists in LNG. We are, of course, a very large and sophisticated player in it. We've built that capability up over years. We intend to be the leader in this industry, and we believe this industry has a long running room ahead of it, including in Russia.
Just a word to say that Canada is competitive, but Yamal Peninsula is more competitive, and that the Arctic 2 project will be even a step forward in terms of competitiveness compared to Yamal. We are building together with Novatek, I see Leonel Michelson, hello. We are building a huge province of LNG there in the middle of nowhere. Nobody was believing in this project 7, 8 years ago. It was considered in the industry as one of the most crazy ones, but I must ensure everybody that with the support of the Russian government, which has helped in spending money on infrastructures and which is continuing to open the northern route, we are building there one of the, I would say, new province for LNG for the world. And I could thank Mr. President Putin for his leadership. And again, I think it's just a startup of a story, and that will be one of the largest provinces of gas, natural gas in the world. So thank you for your support.
President Putin, let's get back to geopolitics. When you were talking about oil, and when everyone talks about oil and disruptions on the market, they don't just talk about Iran, they talk about Venezuela. You mentioned Venezuela at the beginning of our conversation. Last year, I interviewed the President Maduro, the president of Venezuela here. Venezuela is an ally of Russia. Russia has a lot of oil interests in Venezuela. Oil production in Venezuela is not going well, and politically things are going very poorly. As you know, millions of people are leaving the country. There's hunger. There is a lot of talk in the United States, and not only in the United States, in Central and South America, that perhaps it's time for President Maduro to go. Do you agree with that?
Это должен определить народ Венесуэлы.
The people of Venezuela has to decide on that, and nobody else in the world. As for various instruments and tools to influence the situation in Venezuela, well, we understand that we all influence each other, but nobody should use tools that deteriorate the situation of the civil population. Because we cannot be happy that people suffer there. We do not want them to live a worse life than they do now. Recently, there was a terrorist attack against President Maduro. Do you say that we have to approve of such tools? They are absolutely unacceptable. The people has to have the right to decide on their own fate. Nobody can impose any sort of decision on them. Well, the situation there has been built throughout the history, and same situation was in Southeast Asia and on other continents. No one can interfere into it while not understanding what's going on. It will be like an elephant breaking into a glass store. People have to decide. This is my take of it. And I wanted to get back to the previous issue, since we are talking about energy here. I'd like to comment on what my colleagues have mentioned about energy resources and energy capabilities of Russia. They're immense indeed. We rank first in gas stocks, 73.3 trillion cubic meters of gas. You have been talking about Yamal Peninsula, but we plan to launch another project, Arctic 2, at another peninsula, and the total amount of investment will be 25 billion USDs, whereas the first project had invested 27 billion USDs. We rank third in oil stocks in Russia. Well, take into account that the area of the country is the biggest in the world, and I believe that we can exploit and survey further, and we will discover additional stocks. So this is what was given to us by God and what was developed by the previous generations, and we do not have, and we cannot forget about it, and we will further on work with our partners. I'd like to pay attention to the fact that almost any major energy company is active in Russia.
When we were talking about the EU initiative to try and allow trade between countries, EU countries and Iran, I couldn't help but remember that Russia itself, faced with sanctions, is thinking about a plan to wean itself off of the dollar. This is something that many countries have tried and failed. Why does Russia think that it can succeed in this?
Вы сказали в прошедшем времени или это неточный перевод?
Did you say it in the past tense, or was the interpretation incorrect?
Значит, вы знаете, я иногда думаю, что было бы хорошо для нас, если бы...
Sometimes I think that everybody who wants to impose sanctions on us should do it at once, all of them at once, because this would allow us to protect our national interests using the tools that we think are the most effective. But generally speaking, it is very harmful. It is very harmful for those who introduce sanctions. That is why we will never support sanctions introduced apart from UN.
Since you brought up the subject of sanctions, as you know, after the Skripal poisoning, Russia's facing even more of them, perhaps as soon as November. What is Russia prepared to do to change the trajectory of relations with the United States and the West?
Вы знаете, не мы же вводим эти санкции в отношении Соединенных Штатов.
We do not the ones to introduce sanctions against US or Western countries. We will make reciprocal steps, but they are very reserved ones. We are being very, very careful. We do not want to harm ourselves. As for Skripals, well, this scandal is being artificially blown up and extended. And I know that some media, some of your colleagues try to promote the idea that Mr. Skripal is a rights advocate. But as a matter of fact, he is a spy, a traitor. There is such a notion as a traitor. The man who betrayed his fatherland. He is one of them. Just imagine the situation. You are a citizen of your country. All of a sudden, in your country, there is a person who betrays it. What is your relation to him? Just think of it. Really, that normal reaction would be to say that he's a scoundrel. But around this situation, a whole informational campaign was launched. I hope that it will come to its end, the sooner the better. Me and my colleagues have multiply talked about it and asked to provide us a document, a material. We would then have launched an investigation. I believe we have an agreement with Great Britain of assistance in criminal investigations. Just send it to us, send us the materials. We will direct them to prosecutor's office and we'll investigate it. We'll help you. As for battling between special services, well, you see, espionage is one of the oldest professions in the world, just as prostitution.
Espionage aside, I think there are two other issues. One is the use of chemical weapons, and let's not forget that in addition to the Skripal family being affected in that attack, there was also a homeless person who was killed when they came in contact with nerve agent Novichok?
Послушайте, значит, если мы говорим о том, что травили Скрипалетом, вы хотите сказать, что...
So, listen, please. Now we are speaking that allegedly Skripal was poisoned, and now you are speaking about some other strange person that was poisoned. There are too much speculations around this case. Just do you imagine that some guys have come there and started to poison homeless people? Where do they work then? No one needs to poison others. I've said Skripal is a traitor. He was caught, he was punished. He spent all in all 5 years in prison, and we let him out. And that's it. He left. He worked in Great Britain and consulted some special services there. And what of that? About what we are speaking right now? About oil, gas, or about espionage? What was your question then?
Actually, choo-choo.
Давайте перейдем на другую древнейшую
Well,
профессию.
fine, we can discuss another ancient job. We can discuss what's going on about that too. Why not?
A lot of what we've discussed today goes back to Russia's relationship with the United States. And so I'll ask you just a couple of questions about that, and we can move on. The U.S. says you personally ordered the 2016 interference in the elections. I know you deny that. You have said you wanted Trump elected. What do you want to see in 2018 from these midterm elections?
В России или...
Do you mean in Russia or in the US? About what are you asking?
What would you like to see happen in the 2018 midterm elections in the United States?
Я хочу, чтобы... Скажу совершенно серьезно.
I will be serious in this issue. I want all this nonsense to stop. The nonsense that has to do with some fantasy meddling of the Russian Federation with some election campaigns in the US, so that finally the elites of the US would come down, would figure out what they want from each other, and they would be able to restore balance, just like in the oil markets, the balance between common sense and the national interests, I mean, so that the domestic feuds within the US would not poison the Russian-US relations and have a negative impact in the world.
I'll ask this final question on the political front. In Helsinki, you said that you wanted President Trump to win because he favors better relations with Russia. But in fact, as Russia itself says, all of the time, relations between Russia and the United States seem to get worse every day. Wouldn't it be better for Russia to have a president in the United States that is not politically compromised by the widely held perception that this country helped him get into the White House?
Во-первых, я не считаю президента...
First of all, I do not think that President Trump was somehow compromised. He was elected, people voted for him, that was the choice of the people. Someone might not want to respect the opinion of the electors and voted in the US, but it's not our business, it's the business of the US. What's better, what's worse? Politics do not allow for such speculations. It could have been worse, we do not know. We proceed from the situation we have now and are going to work proceeding from that. We do not know whether it's for the good or for the bad, but we do not have any other president, and we do not have any other country instead of the US. It is a major world power, a leader in many fields, our natural partner in a whole spectrum of tracks, including international security, non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, combating terrorism, combating climate change, protecting environment, and so on. We have a lot of overlapping joint challenges and problems, and we should solve them together. We proceed from the fact that sooner or later the time comes when we will be able to restore the relations 100%.
In this conversation? bringing this conversation to perhaps an end, it dawned upon me this year, and this is only anecdotal, that wherever I went in the world, it just seemed there was record temperatures, and the issue of climate change is real and has to be dealt with. I wanted to ask the members of the panel if one of you, if you had this same sort of epiphany this year and said something has to be done.
Perhaps this is not the years of epiphanies, but it is certainly the year in which we are all going to understand what is going on in the energy transition, which helps. It goes in the direction of helping climate change. The World Energy Outlook of the International Energy Agency that will be published, has been announced already, shows that while energy demand of the world is growing, the electricity portion of energy demand is growing twice as fast, which means that the world is progressively electrifying its energy consumption. This happens while it is increasingly available and it is increasingly possible to decarbonize the energy mix. So while competitiveness of renewable energy sources is drastically decarbonizing the world energy mix, the world is using more electricity. And if you start using a decarbonized electricity into transportation, industry, and other segments of human activity, you decarbonize them too. And so there is not only an effort to say, okay, I have to reduce the CO2 percentage of my electricity production, just use electricity more and more, because that is going to be decarbonized by the economics. And that's good for the environment. That's something that we were not fully aware until, say, the beginning of this year. This is now becoming a big trend worldwide, of course with different speeds. This is not the same everywhere, but it's a good news for those that, with some exceptions in a big country at this moment, but for those that think that there is a climate change and it is man-made.
Ben, I want you to pick up on one point there. We heard Francesco there alluding to the fact that one country in the world is rolling back a lot of the regulations to mitigate climate change. That's obviously the United States. The Trump administration has rolled back a number of these things, and yet it seems like many people in the oil and gas industry remain concerned, even though there's some let up on the pressure in the United States to take action.
Well, a few points, Ryan. First of all, we didn't need the weather events of this year to be convinced that climate change is a real issue that we have to deal with. This has been with us for some time. We know that it has to be tackled. We also know, by the way, as an energy player, that this is a challenge of tremendous proportions, not in the least because we have to match it up with, as Francesco says, growing energy demand, and also lifting a lot of people still out of energy poverty. So the challenge is absolutely tremendous. In quite a few cases, it gets actually sort of simplified in people's mind by suggesting that we can actually deal with this challenge by just more renewables. But we have to bear in mind, if all power generation was renewable, we would only have solved 1/5 of the energy consumption problem in the world. So the problem is much bigger than we imagined. I would like to come back to a comment that President Putin made just a moment ago, and I will talk about President Trump in a moment as well. The challenge is actually that we have insufficient worldwide collaboration on this problem. We tend to have, when it comes to climate change, we tend to have either a festival of opinions or we have everybody disagreeing with everybody else. And really, we don't have time for that anymore. We actually have to start working together and collaborating on a scale that hasn't been done before if we want to have a net zero emission world by 2070, because that's what it will take globally to get to below 2 degrees centigrade, as we know Paris has agreed. And I think at this point in time, again, much of the bandwidth is being lost by disagreeing and coming with competing opinions. On the United States, yes, of course, it's on the one hand true and attractive to comment that, you know, the United States has abdicated and has pulled out of Paris or is in the process of doing so. But the other thing we have to bear in mind that the United States is also a great example of actually reducing emissions by doing the right thing, which is switching from coal to gas. This happened partly because of regulatory pressures, but predominantly this happened because of economic pressures. It just made economic sense to do so. So if you look at the amount of emission reduction that has taken place, the United States actually stands out as a great example. And the only other place where I see a tremendous amount of progress being made, or at least the intention to make progress, is in China. And that is indeed very much driven by policies, and of course also driven by a desire to improve air quality. But I think, indeed, we have to work together, not only as industry, but definitely also civil society, governments, consumers as a whole, to figure out how we're going to do this collectively without trying to somehow push the problem to somebody else or to another player. Least of all, to energy producers. If I just draw a quick parallel, if we are going to solve the problem of obesity in some countries, we're not going to solve it by attacking the agricultural sector. We are going to solve it by actually attacking the consumption and not necessarily the production of food.
Please.
Yes, just to build on what Ben said, the International Panel on Climate Change will publish their new report in the next few days, and the information that we have about that at this stage is really, really alarming, that this problem is getting out of hands. And roughly speaking, most of the scientists would agree that when the world emissions today are around 36, 37 gigatons of CO2 equivalent, we would have to cut them in half during 2020s, cut them again in half in 2030s, and once again in half in 2040s. Now, the reality is that nothing of this is really happening, despite the big investments that are being made into renewables. This is not happening. We are developing towards a potentially 4 to 6 degree world instead of a 2 degree world with catastrophic consequences. So that's why quick international coordination between world top leaders is needed, so that we would get something like that could be a global carbon trading market-based system with tough globally coordinated targets covering pretty much all sectors. It would have to be something of that order of magnitude if we would really want to make a big change, and this is where efforts from world's top leaders would really be needed.
Just to add a point, I think we need to be realistic. Today we are not going at all on the roadmap to 2 degrees. And why? Because the people need energy. There are a lot of people who do not have access to energy in many emerging countries. And they want to have access to cheap energy. Reliable and cheap, affordable energy are fundamentals. And the big challenge is to combine that with the climate, the clean energy challenge. But the short-term issues for many emerging countries is to have access to energy. And so either the developed countries are ready to make some huge transfer in order to help these emerging countries to invest in more expensive energies, because let's be clear, even if there is a decline in the cost of renewables, in the cost of even in natural gas, it's somewhere more expensive than coal, for example. It's why we need absolutely to continue in our world, and companies like oil and gas companies, which are considered sometimes like the devils, you know, we are participating to these bad guys. In fact, we are spending our time, in particular in a country like Russia, to continue to be more and more competitive, producing lower cost oil, like it's possible in Russia, producing lower cost gas like it's possible in Russia, lowering the competitiveness of LNG in order to bring this natural gas to all these emerging countries in Myanmar, in Pakistan, in Vietnam, in Philippines, in many countries, like in China. I think this is the duty of what we need to do. And the solution will go through the economics, I would say. If we are able to produce more competitive energy sources, then we will manage this transition. But I never believe that ecology is just done by regulation. It doesn't work like that. It has to be driven by economic fundamentals. And from this perspective, I would say to President Putin, your country is almost a perfect model, but by the way, Total is following, you know. Low-cost oil, more natural gas, plenty of renewables with hydro. There is one point where I disagree, is don't produce too much coal, Mr. President.
Minister Falek, before I let you speak, I did notice this weekend a story that said that Saudi Arabia had shelved a $200 billion plan to build the world's biggest solar power generation project. Is that because you think it just doesn't make economic sense, or is it something else?
Well, let me address it in the context of what we're talking about, which is climate change. First of all, climate change is real. And we see the effects, of course, in our region more than anywhere else. Extreme temperature, desertification, acidification of the sea, and impacts on all kind of ecosystems, and also of humans' ability to live and thrive. And therefore, it has to be addressed collectively by the global community. And I think the other point I want to make is that you cannot isolate climate change and the environment from global macroeconomic trends, demographic trends, urbanization, and all of these issues. Billions of people who either don't have today access to modern energy or will be added to this planet's population will demand energy. We have no way of denying them this. And they will get it one way or another. The question is, how do we provide that energy in an affordable, accessible, but also in the least environmentally harmful way? And of course, the solution that we've been advocating is that it's going to be all of the available sources of energy. Oil and gas will continue to play the leading role, hopefully with technology and efficiency and with less carbon impact. Of course, renewables and nuclear will also increasingly play a role, despite the unpopularity of nuclear today due to some safety concerns. But we believe technology will address this, and of course, the Russian Federation has a leading role to play globally, and the kingdom will play a part of this. Renewables, I think, is the big game changer going forward, and everybody is betting on it and is investing in it, and so is the kingdom. And His Royal Highness, our Crown Prince, signed an agreement with the SoftBank Vision Fund 6 months ago to launch probably the world's largest investment in solar, to be centered in the kingdom, but really to be addressing the global opportunity and the global challenge. And you mentioned the 200 gigabytes as a long-term target. The kingdom is absolutely not shelving that project. Work has been going on day and night since the launch of that initiative 6 months ago. We have pilot projects that are being developed. We have investors that have been talked to about investing in the kingdom and the whole value chain. We have research centers that are being developed to really do a game changer. And it's not just about generation. I think the biggest problem with renewables that we know is about storage and around-the-clock availability. So we're going to be investing in new storage technologies, batteries, and other storage schemes, smart grids, connecting with our neighbors. We're already connected to the GCC. We're talking to Iraq about connecting to their system. We're going to be connecting to Africa, and so on and so forth. So renewables is a game changer. However, as an oil and gas producer, and in this group, I would say this will not eliminate the role that oil and gas has to play for many, many decades to come. And of course, gas is much better than coal and electricity, which will play a leading role as well.
President Putin, I know you need to get to a meeting with the Austrian Chancellor, so I'm going to wrap this session up with you, sir. The title of our conversation today is Sustainable Energy for a Changing World. You've been driving Russian energy policy for nearly 20 years now. What changes in the world, or what change in the world is, would you identify as the biggest concern for you, and what gives you the most optimism when it comes to what we're seeing?
Если позволите, я все-таки по теме.
If I may, I will also cover the questions you asked. We are really witnessing global warming. The reasons, however, remain obscure because there's been no answer, and the so-called anthropogenic emissions cannot be listed among the main reasons for that. The reasons might be very global, for example, some cosmic changes, some shifts that we cannot even see probably overall in this galaxy. But, well, to some end, human emissions also have their influence, at least many experts think so, but they believe that they do not make that large influence. Today, everybody's blaming the United States, but as you see, we have many issues with the United States, and we have various approaches to many international affairs, and we give various assessments to our bilateral relations. I mean, me and the President of the US. But we have to be objective. I remember the times when President Bush refused to sign Kyoto Protocol, but still, later on, we found a decision to it. And I believe that everything will be the same in this situation as well. President Trump believes that this is not profitable for the country to sign Paris Agreement. I will not go deep into it. We all know what we're talking about here. But I believe that we do not have to antagonize our relations with the United States, because without even without the United States, the issue of reducing human emissions still remains, and without the US, we cannot solve these problems. That means that we have to engage them in our discussion and in our joint cooperation. And as far as I understand, President Trump is not against it. He says that he's against certain provisions of Paris Agreement, but he's not against cooperating with the whole world on this topic. Now about energy and emissions and the future of global energy industry. In order to battle extreme heat, we need energy resources, probably even more than we need in order to battle cold weather. And it has been said absolutely correctly that millions of people do not have access to energy resources. And actually, we cannot prevent people from using using what civilization can give them. Russia joins best international practices in this area. I speak about energy preservation, energy efficiency, technology that has the least impact on the environment, and we will be active on this track. I agree with my colleague from Saudi Arabia that renewables and alternative energy sources are very important, but we cannot get by without hydrocarbons. During the decades to come, we will be using those resources. We've been talking about oil, but coal is the most popular source of energy today. But Today we talk about electro cars, but electric cars need electricity. And some countries need to burn their coal in order to get electricity. And today we see that the most environmentally friendly energy source is gas. So we have to view all the problems in package. And now
Patrick Pouyanné posed a challenge to you. He said it would be good if Russia used less coal. Are you prepared to accept that challenge and reduce consumption of coal here in Russia and production?
А мы же подписали соответствующие Парижские соглашения.
We have signed Paris Agreement. We have taken on those obligations, and we have accomplished our obligations. I mean, Kyoto Protocol. Now we have Paris Agreement. We have taken on our obligations, and we will be strictly compliant with them. And it is not about reducing coal usage and coal production, because we are not the biggest coal, we are not the biggest emittent, I mean CO2 to the atmosphere. In Asia, there are many of such countries, so we are not leaders here. We sell coal, that's true, but we sell what the world is ready to buy. So the question is not about us, it is about modern technologies that use primary energy sources, these or that ones. And your final question, could you repeat it?
The title of the panel is Sustainable Energy for a Changing World. You've been driving Russia's energy policy for nearly 20 years now. What changes, or what is the change that gives you the most hope, and what do you think the biggest challenge that you see right now amongst the changes is for energy?
Обеспокоенность вызывает неопределенность.
Well, we are greatly concerned about unpredictability, both in policy and economy, volatility, if you want so. And the number of those unpredictable factors is growing. Uncertainty. Uncertainty also causes...
Are you talking about your colleague, the President of the United States?
Не только. Ведь...
Not only about him. He contributes, certainly he contributes to this feeling of ours, but, well, we understand that he's the president of a bigger global power, but I'm just talking generally about the situation. Have a look at growing extremism. What are the sources for it? What are the reasons? Why are those problems that acute? Why this extremism, why does it emerge into terrorism? We have to think of the reasons. But, I will not go deep into detail, but many parameters are like this. Economy, this uncertainty in many areas, well, raises our concern. But we are very optimistic about the common sense. No matter how difficult and complicated the situation is, humankind will also find a way out of the most precarious situation, being guided by the interests of their countries, of their peoples, and this is the goal of any government, to ensure growth of wealth of their citizens. And the sooner the better, everybody will understand that we have to abandon all the disputes and contradictions, at least abandon attempts to solve those contradictions by illicit instruments that go beyond the limits of international law. I believe that we have to strengthen the leading role of UN and on this basis to move forward.
And on that note, please join me in thanking and congratulating our participants in today's panel and, of course, our host today, the President of Russia. Thank you.
Вам спасибо большое.
Thanks to you.